So welcome to the webinar. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Judy Browse, and I'm the Executive Director of the North American Association for Environmental Education. And hopefully you're in the right place. This is all about eeWORKS. What have we learned and why does it matter with this project? And for those of you who don't know about the project, we're going to tell you all about it. Those of you who have used it, we'd love to hear from you. And we're going to talk about why we're doing this project, why we did this project, what we need to do. And it was starting at the beginning of making the case for environmental education. Does it work? And how we can talk about it in a meaningful way. And we could not have a more talented group on our webinar right now than the group we have here that is actually looking at what actually works in environmental education. And so you're going to hear today from Allison Bowers from Stanford, Martha Monroe from the University of Florida, Heidi Ballard from the University of California, Davis, and Nicole Ardwin from Stanford. So happy you are all here. We have been through this journey. I think it's been a decade, and Nicole, you'll know better than anyone about how long we've been working on this, but it's been fantastic. And we really are going to be looking at kind of what we've accomplished in the last few years, what the project is all about, some of the findings, and then also what did we learn overall, and what are the implications for the future. So that's what we're hoping to do. Really appreciate all of you who have sent us your questions. Our wonderful team is going to do our best to answer as many as we can during the webinar, and even if we don't highlight them, we'll try and answer them in the chat. And for those of you who are new to our webinar series, we do try to bring in new ideas, new speakers, new thinking to the field and beyond to really help us all learn across borders and boundaries. And I want to thank all of our affiliates who co-sponsored this webinar series with us. And just a big thank you to the affiliates who do so much in the state, regions, and provinces where they are based. So if you don't know about your affiliates, go to our website and you can find the affiliate in your organization. Another big thanks to EPA and the E360 Plus project that has allowed us to do this webinar series. And because it's a webinar, you are all muted, but you can talk to us through the chat, as you know. So please put comments, ideas, suggestions. You can answer questions in the chat. And we do have closed captioning if you need language translation. We will be recording this webinar and sharing that with all of you. So if you go to the toolbar, you'll see the captions, CC, you'll see the chat. And you can pick from 31 languages. So if you're learning a new language, pick a different language and see if you know what they're talking about. Okay. And a big thank you to Carrie, who is our Senior Communications and Data Specialist. And she is amazing and helps manage so much at NAAEE, including our webinar series. So thank you, Carrie, for all that you do. So eeWORKS, just to give a 2-minute background before I turn it over to our speakers, started about 10 years ago with the idea that we needed more evidence that EE actually works and helps us address the environmental and social issues that we're facing. And it was originally called From Anecdotes to Evidence because we have a million stories in this field, and they are amazing stories. But we also have people asking us for some impact evidence. And so this project kind of started out as giving us all some ammunition to be able to sell environmental education because we know it works. And one of the things we've talked about over the life of this project is we all know how awesome we are, but that isn't enough for some people, that we kind of need a little bit more background to talk about how awesome we are. So this project has really helped a lot of us make the case for why we're doing the work we're doing and what does the research show about what we're doing. And I want to just emphasize that stories are still super important. They actually ground our work, they tell what happens, they showcase what we're doing. But if we combine the stories and we combine the evidence, we have a stronger case for the work that we are doing. So this eeWORKS project was really looking at what is the impact of environmental education, what are outcomes that are important in our field, what existing evidence documents some of the approaches that we're using, what's effective, and you're going to hear from our speakers about what we found with 8 different topics. The project was not just about the research, but also connecting that to the stories from the research and putting together communication tools and tips and tricks on how you talk to different audiences, whether it's a school administrator or your boss, to make the case, or a funder, and then professional development like we're doing here to tell people about it and how you can use this info. And this was a partnership program every single step of the way. We had so many wonderful partners that have participated, including an advisory group, and just so many people have weighed in over the years. And I also want to thank the NAAEE team and Drew Burnett, who sadly passed away in 2023. He was helping to manage this for many years. So it's the work of so many wonderful people. And you're going to hear more about these 8 systematic reviews and some of the studies that were analyzed and what we found through this project. We also have a website, and Carrie's going to put the link in the chat so you can go and see the executive summaries, the communication issue, the stories, the research, the articles. It's all on the website. Thanks to all of our speakers today and to our communications team. And we just had so much help along the way on this. So you'll find the executive summary, you'll find information, you'll find the articles, and it's also in our research database. And again, tips and tricks on how to communicate about this is also super important. So I am now really excited for the best part of this webinar to turn it over to our speakers. And our first 2 speakers are going to be Martha and Heidi, and they're going to get us started. So Martha, I think you're first up. Welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thanks so much, Judy. It's really a pleasure to be able to join this group and share some ideas of what we've learned over the years. So each of these 7 reviews followed the same process. And just to give you an orientation to what that process is, it starts by trying to collect the papers that we're going to be reviewing. And that means figuring out what it is we're searching for. So what are the keywords that are useful in what combination to access the right amount of papers? And for any of these reviews, the right amount is around 1,000 different papers. That might sound like it's way too many, and it is, because we're not going to end up with 1,000. We start with that many because then we sort of whittle it down. Some of these papers may just say they involved outcomes of environmental education, but that doesn't mean it was a research paper that showed where the evidence comes from and what that evidence was. And so we need to refine our pile of papers quite a bit. And we do that by reading all the abstracts from that first, say it was 1,000, and we get rid of all the ones who just mention environmental education and who just mention the importance of evaluation. Focus down on what we think is going to work. Then we read all those papers and again use the same criteria to throw out the ones that aren't really the ones that don't fit our criteria. And our criteria for the most part was, what's the evidence? Where's the research that shows us this did something? The benefit of this project and this kind of process is that we don't start by saying, we want to find out all the things that are good about environmental education. We're finding out everything that they came up with. Could be good, could be not so good. We're including it all. Then once we have our final set of papers, and that varied from 50 to 100 about, we read them all again and code them at that point for who was involved, what did they do, and what did they come up with. There are limitations, of course, to this process. We were all using the English-speaking peer-reviewed journals. That does sound like it's a huge limitation, except that many faculty all over the world publish in English-speaking journals. I will say, however, that we're probably weak on Asian stories and evidence, which means there's more room for everybody else to do something. There's also a huge time lag. If you think about somebody doing a project and evaluating it or collecting data, let's say they do the project in 2010. Well, it's going to take them some time to analyze that data, consolidate it, write up a paper, get it into the publication process, and finally see it through publication. So maybe 2013 is when it finally comes out. Then we come along with our systematic review and capture that publication from 2013, and it takes us time. to consolidate the evidence, write the paper, and get it into publication. So the earliest that can happen might be 2015. So as soon as any of these papers are published, they're referring to data that was collected 5 years ago. So already they're old. And it may take us more than 2 years to get the paper out. So that's one limitation. The other thing is that many people will read these reviews and say, oh, so this is what we know about the field of environmental education. And that's just not true. It's what we know about the research in the field of environmental education. And that depends on somebody asking a research question or evaluating a program and getting it into the literature. We evaluated the research, not the field of environmental education. So that is a helpful caveat to keep in mind. We also didn't do this alone. Most of us worked with teams of students and staff. And of course, as Judy mentioned, there was an advisory board to keep us all in the straight and narrow, help us prioritize what themes should be done. So lots of people were involved. So Heidi is going to take it off next and use one of these examples to walk you through the process. Thanks.
Thanks, Martha. And thank you very much, Judy and Carrie and the team for letting me share this work. So we thought that it would be useful before revealing all the different outcomes from all the topics and studies of this review to just focus in on one and give you a sense of how, like, sort of more depth about what we found. So I'm going to focus on the study that we did on community and citizen science. And one thing to note is that because that most of the papers, many of the papers in this study actually focus on the evidence of important outcomes from environmental education practices and approaches. And in this paper, we flipped it a little and looked at the evidence of whether and how participatory approaches to science or community and citizen science actually lead to environmental education outcomes that we care about. So using community and citizen science as an approach to environmental education. Next slide, please. So the key thing, as Martha talked about, is we had to develop our criteria. And one of the criteria is actually first just figuring out what terms to use. And we found that I think all the teams found during this systematic review process that we encountered a really wide variety of terms that different researchers and educators use in any given field. So we had to make sure we included all the different kinds of terms. So this is an example of, we had to have terms that were participatory things in that top box. And then we had to include terms that were referred to education and learning. And then we had to have terms that referred to the environment or ecology and conservation. And those were sort of our sort of big search term clusters for this particular review. We also had to hone in on those papers, as Martha said, that really actually reported outcomes from empirical research. And in our case, we found that there were, for example, 400 different papers that fit all those criteria of terms, but they were just conceptual. They were discussing the topic. But 100 of them, we widowed it down and found that 100 of them, conveniently, focused on the empirical research that came from this work. So next slide. So for this study, one of the things that's really important, I mean, for all the studies, we needed to really define what we meant by the terms that we were using, even the term environmental education. And in this case, you know, community and citizen science is the term that we use to sort of talk about all the different kinds of ways of people participating. So the definition that we used was including community science, and which is community driven and community led projects, as well as sort of the term citizen science, which really refers to scientist led projects. We also wanted to blow up or disaggregate this black box of participatory approaches to environmental science, to look at the ways that people actually participate in projects that lead to environmental education outcomes, and using CCS as an approach to EE. So if you see this figure, exactly, red box. If you look at the figure, of course, 97% of the projects that we looked at, the studies that examined EE outcomes, had data collection, people collecting data, right? Birds, butterflies, plants, public health information. They were collecting data. But we also included all these other parts of the scientific process that are really important that people participated in. And we found it was quite a lot of different studies that had people included in the reporting of the findings afterwards, and the planning of the data collection and the study beforehand, and in the data analysis and interpretation. So that was pretty interesting to discover. Next slide. And so then you want to know, that was yes, the outcomes, the actual environmental education outcomes of people participating in environmental science. We focused on these sort of 5 key areas. The top 3 are the ones you might expect to see that are kind of standard science and environmental learning outcomes, like science content knowledge. 56 articles found positive environmental science content knowledge gains. 32 articles found science inquiry skills and understanding the nature of science from this participatory approach. And 16 or so found various versions of positive attitudes about science and the environment. But then we also, if you could click the next box, click to the next slide, we focused and saw a lot of papers, actually 30 or more, on these sort of tougher nuts to crack in environmental education, like community connection and cooperation, and those actual environmental behavior outcomes. So community connection, community level outcomes are things like stakeholders having social learning occur between, a variety of stakeholders. And those environmental behaviors are ones that Stanford team studied, I'll talk about in a minute, like people restoring or improving the habitat after having collected data on it, or using the data to advocate in civic contexts and city council meetings and things like that. So we found a lot of outcomes for those areas as well. Next slide. And so we, like all of the studies, we also sort of zeroed in with the help of Martha and NAAEE on sort of what are the key strategies then for environmental educators and educators to use based on these outcomes and findings. And so we zeroed in on suggesting that educators support people in making sense of the data collection and not just train them to collect the data, but why they're collecting the data. Encourage people to work with the data and to share the findings themselves. Emphasize the local place and connections to the local community and the projects that you do. Investigate, have people participating in these community and citizen science projects investigate the sociological impacts of issues or aspects of issues, and also use digital technology and explore when you can. There are many apps and platforms that allow people to dig in and use and collect data in ways that use technology. So next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk about, that was sort of a deeper dive. Now I'm going to talk about the sort of various topics, the other topics that were studied. I'm going to talk about a few, and Martha's going to talk about a few from each of these big, massive systematic reviews. So next slide. The first, sort of to begin at the beginning, the first review actually from the Stanford team focused on what many in the field feel is a dire need to provide research evidence, which is for the benefits for K-12 students of environmental education approaches. So their review yielded 119 different studies that examined the outcomes of EE approaches and found things like including knowledge gains, the outcomes were knowledge gains in core areas, kind of more school focused areas like science, math, reading, and writing, huge gains in those areas, but also gains like socio-emotional skills, critical thinking skills, and problem solving skills as a result of EE approaches. And also that EE impacted students' motivation to learn and their sense of civic responsibility and ability to take action for the environment. So this first review, actually 4 foreshadowed a common finding across all the reviews, that there's a strong evidence base for positive outcomes of environmental ed. And for K-12 audiences, this specifically includes a combination of environmental related outcomes and other academic outcomes that are valued in the K-12 settings. Next slide. And the next review, also conducted by the Stanford team, was another really rubber hitting the road question in environmental ed. And that's what impacts there might be or outcomes there might be for conservation and environmental quality of environmental education activities. So they found 105 articles that studied this question, and synthesizing evidence from this review revealed how hard it is to measure direct environmental impacts of environmental education, but that being intentional about evaluation and including direct action in the project, in the program, can help overcome this challenge. So these were ranging from actions related to improving degraded environmental conditions, such as planting trees and improving habitat, cleaning up beaches, collecting data, but also capacity buildings, like improved relationships and communication within a community were some of the conservation outcomes, and increased participation in conservation projects. And then those direct improvements like physical impacts to improved water quality or enhanced levels of biodiversity all came from environmental education programs. So next slide. And another study, or a further study, a systematic review, was on looking at the benefits of EE and nature connectedness to in early childhood contexts. So in this review, systematic review, revealed that the combination of early childhood education and environmental education is a powerful one, offering opportunities for play, for early development, and meaningful environmental action, even at very young ages, which you might not expect. So they saw consistent gains in children's environmental knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors, but also in broader developmental benefits. And they found that the most impactful programs were adaptable and accessible for a variety of settings. And so now I think it's time for Martha to take over.
Yep, thanks, Heidi. So here's 3 more of our systematic reviews. The first 2 are also done by Stanford, and they focused on smaller subsets of environmental education goals. Civic engagement is really important, and that means any of the activities that help support democracy. So first they had to figure out, what is it that we're talking about? And when civic engagement is built into environmental education programs, it tends to lead to measurable change at the individual level, such as knowledge, attitude, skills, and taking action, but also at the community level, such as providing that glue that keeps a community working together and improving the life of the community itself. The strategies that tended to move toward these outcomes are things like focusing on the local community, right where people live, and engaging the learners in working together, that social interaction, and also the actual action taking. So it could be practicing at the school level, or targeting a unit in the community, or at the civic level of community engagement in general. Also, notice that these aren't all 5th graders, for example. Some of these were college students, some of these were adults. So we're not just talking about kids doing this work. In another example, the Stanford team looked at positive youth development. Oh, wait a minute, I didn't do that. Oh, darn. Sorry, things are jumping around. Positive youth development. Here we go. Positive youth development refers to 4 different kinds of development. Physical development, like healthy habits. Intellectual development, like critical thinking, decision-making skills. Emotional development, like coping skills, responsibility, self-efficacy. And social development, like relationship building, networks, cultural awareness. The kinds of environmental education programs that tend to lead toward those outcomes are ones that are meaningful and relevant and local, which we sort of said before, that provide opportunities for teamwork and collaboration and action strategies that occur in the outdoors, that don't just leave it to chance for kids to develop these skills, but specifically provide instruction that leads to the development of these skills and that are interdisciplinary. Now, I'm going to click on the next slide. And finally, we also targeted climate change. It's important to recognize that this was done in 2015, 2016, so we missed all the things that have happened since then, and there has been a lot in terms of climate anxiety and climate justice and youth voices. But at least from that older snapshot, we learned, oh, and the other thing we did was that we didn't limit it to environmental education. We also included science education, because a lot of what had happened earlier was called science ed. The kinds of outcomes that these papers looked at ranged from knowledge to attitudes to action. So it covered the gamut. And of course, we learned that good education leads to these things, is personally relevant and meaningful, engages interactively, and focuses on science process. Environmental education programs that had action built into it, either personal action or work in the school or work in the community, was essential to building those skills. And there was also a third broad category that included things like when educators helped kids understand deliberation and the process of listening to people who thought differently than they did, when the group had diversity involved in it, different perspectives and thinking about climate, when the learners learned how to explain why they know what they know, and when they learned how to overcome misconceptions. These were the things that might be linked more closely to climate education than water education, for example, but that were essential to moving towards these outcomes. So I believe that we have a few moments built into this process to pause and let you ask some questions. I see that there's been a lot of things in the chat, so we'll start talking about those things. And Carrie, if you want to help focus,
Yep.
or Judy, on things that we should do verbally,
Yep.
go right
So
ahead.
Martha, thank you so much. And Heidi, that was fantastic. We have had a lot of comments. Why don't we start with an easy one? Basically, if you guys can answer, what were you surprised about with the work you both did? That was Stephanie's question.
So I'll start with that very last comment I made. I was happy to see it. I was surprised that the research was able to point us to the deliberative discussion, the misconceptions, the harder aspects of education. Heidi, what do you think?
I was surprised about actually how many studies documented people participating in things other than data collection. That's something that has been sort of something I've wondered about and conjectured about, but to see that the study, there really is a lot of evidence of people participating in analysis and in other sharing findings and planning of the scientific research or monitoring, and having all these great environmental ed outcomes. I was surprised by that.
And you two, Stacy asked a question about qualitative versus quantitative. Do you want to respond at all to that question?
Yeah, I finally just finished answering in the chat.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I really think that most of the studies included both quantitative and qualitative. They have different outcomes. The qualitative helps us see how individuals felt about the program and what they might have been able to do with that experience. The quantitative tend to be able to generalize to all the participants or maybe even non-participants, and provide some of that, the numeric evidence that some policymakers might appreciate.
And yeah, and I can just say, following Martha's comments in the chat also, or that we did look, we were all encouraged to look critically at the way that the research was done and the extent to which evaluation or research was actually done on quantitative and qualitative outcomes. And so in my study, I found it was a lot of self-reporting, either quantitatively or qualitatively, and that really we emphasize like the evaluation needs to get sort of more systematic and rigorous of the outcomes that people are really hoping for in environmental education activities, in my case, in community and citizen science. So, but we document both.
That is so great. And we will ask these other questions at the end. We'll let Nicole and Allison go next. But one thing, just to take a look at the chat and look at what Ellie and Manuel have stated in there about the work they're doing. And also just Ian's question about the metrics. And anyway, we can refer to that again at the end. Is that okay? Is there anything else, Martha and Heidi, that you noticed, or Carrie, that we need to answer now?
I just wanted to echo Nicole's response that we can't really compare any of these papers to each other because they were all unique and they were all different in each of the reviews. But interestingly, Allison and Nicole are now going to talk about the review of the reviews. So in general, what can we learn?
Thank you, Martha. And that does lead us to part 2, is what have we learned and where should we go from here? As Martha said, the minute we publish this, it's already out of date. So what do we do in this field to keep up on this, and what do we think about? But what have we learned? And couldn't have 2 better people to talk about this piece of it than Nicole from Stanford and Allison from Stanford, who have been instrumental in making this program successful. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Nicole, to take it from here.
Great. Thank you so much, Judy. And thanks, Heidi and Martha, for kicking us off with that. Thanks to all of you for being here with us. This is a really amazing project that has been such a labor of love for all of us for the past decade. And I'm just really thrilled that all of you are joining us today to learn about it. And I'm really glad that it's been, I hope, helpful so far, and I hope will continue to be helpful for a number of years. So as Judy mentioned, Allison and I will be talking about the final paper that we've developed that wraps up this work. And also, we're happy to talk more in the questions after this section about what we can and can't say from pulling all these papers together. But we did realize that after completing all of these reviews that we had an interesting and unique opportunity, because across all of the reviews, our teams ended up synthesizing evidence from more than or nearly 550 primary studies. And this useful next step seemed to be for all of us to get together and reflect on what we had learned and to examine the overarching messages from all of those studies, as well as across the individual reviews. So we worked with representatives from all of the review teams, including all of us you see here today in this webinar, using document-based discussions where we compared findings, we identified patterns, and we looked for bigger picture elements that we thought would be useful for the field. So we conducted thematic analysis and iterative refinement, and we identified a number of key themes that we then boiled down to 6 key themes that we'll share with you today. And we considered essential aspects of what seems to make environmental education effective arising from all of these reviews. So Allison will share with you what those themes are, and we have drafted a paper on those, and we look forward to being able to share that paper with you very soon. And our hope is that this meta review provides practitioners, policymakers, funders, and researchers with evidence-based guidance drawn from what we believe is the most comprehensive synthesis to date of environmental education research. So again, we hope that all of you find this useful. We're happy to answer detailed questions in the Q&A section, and I'll go ahead and pass it over to Allison.
Thank you, Nicole. So I'm going to focus on this, what we're calling our meta review, which is a review of all the reviews. So not to be overly technical there. But basically what we learned, as Nicole said, looking across them all, we identified 6 emergent themes that I'm going to go over now that speak to what makes for powerful environmental education. These themes will likely not come as a surprise to all of you on here as environmental educators working in the field, but we hope it's this documentation of these evidence-based strategies that will prove to be useful. Our first key theme really reinforced the idea that there is not a one-size-fits-all model of environmental education. Rather, there's value in having a suite of learning and teaching approaches. And this flexibility is a strength because it allows us as educators to adapt to the specific audiences, settings, the learning preferences, and the available resources we have to design and implement our EE programs. It also supports the interdisciplinary nature of environmental topics. You can bring in science, social studies, art, literature, history, whatever works best for your context and your learners, because environmental issues cannot be solved by science alone. The second theme focuses on participatory approaches. Rather than traditional top-down teaching, the EE research consistently showed a higher impact when programs emphasized active engagement, when it was skill-focused and valued learner input, when it involved collaboration, either between collaboration among learners or between learners and experts, which we'll talk about in a future theme. And also those that emphasized real-world connections, which also pops up as another theme. And this has a variety of benefits, right? That these approaches increase environmental knowledge and awareness, improve the critical thinking that's required to solve complex problems, that it builds self-efficacy in learners so they feel empowered and have the action competence they need to take action. And it enhances civic engagement through the building of skills, civic skills, and knowledge. So essentially, when people are actively involved in their learning, they get more out of it. And we know that as educators, right? For example, instead of just lecturing about water quality, you let your learners design a water quality protocol, then go have them collect data in their community. Then they analyze the data, and then they share that with their local community. And so the learners aren't just receiving information, they're actively generating knowledge and taking ownership of that process. So across the 540 studies, we really saw a lot of these participatory approaches linked to successful outcomes. And so the third theme focuses on direct action, which of course connects to these participatory approach, right? We know that when you're doing participatory approaches, a kind of just logical next step is to include direct action. So direct action could be, we saw all sorts of examples, monitoring local environmental conditions, kind of your traditional community science, basic activity, organizing community cleanups, implementing habitat restoration via removal of invasive species or something like that. Conducting community surveys, going out and talking to folks about environmental issues, as well as environmental advocacy campaigns. And these can, run the range of climate strikes and climate marches to getting people to sign a petition and following through on that petition. And so the benefits of having these direct actions is that it develops agency and empowerment. So if you include an opportunity for direct action right in your program, people see, oh, this is how I do it. This is how I take action. It fosters this sense of citizenship, right? Saying, this is what I do to be part of my community. Certainly builds civic know-how. For example, if you have a direct action of working with the city council to share results, you say, oh, this is how local government works. So you've built skills, civic skills and knowledge. What's really nice is it creates a measurable output. And we've heard already that this was tough. It was tough measuring, environmental change, environmental outputs. So if you have direct action, you can report things like the amount of litter collected, right? Or the amount of people you got to sign a petition. And so if you're going to a funder, this is a way to say, I did this direct action, this many people participated, and this was the measurable result of that participation. And so the next theme is to focus on your local community, and both when you're identifying the issue of importance and coming up with solutions. And again, this connects to these participatory and direct action themes that we just talked about. And so if you're talking about a local issue, it's really easy to connect to your community, but it can also be done when you're talking about global issues like climate change. You can talk about the impacts that people are feeling in their local community. This makes the abstract concepts more tangible, encourages identification of relevant audiences, allows people to see the direct impacts in their own communities, and makes complex issues more approachable. It also supports building community connections. It supports place-based learning, local partnerships, and context-specific solutions. All this by making sure when you design a program and implement it, that you're drawing on what people know most, their local community. And this again leads directly to our next theme, which says, hey, make whatever you're talking about personally relevant and meaningful. And this can be done through these participatory methods, through the direct action, and through the working in a local community. This helps people see something as relevant to their life. And we all know as educators, if it's relevant and meaningful to them, they learn more. They absolutely are more engaged. So the way you do this, and what we saw in the studies, were through connecting to people's personal experiences, through their everyday daily lives, through their personal values, and again, looking at local impacts. And the benefits we saw when folks did this was it helps them identify personal roles and solutions. So we talk a lot about how the difference between individual and collective impact. And a lot of times education can say, oh, you need to reduce your carbon footprint, and can feel very individual and very personal. But if you're connecting it to the whole community, they can see, oh, I have an individual role, but it's part of a collective action. And this is something in these complex challenges like tackling biodiversity and climate change. People, they can feel more motivated, right? If we put all the pressure on learners, then we know that they can become disengaged. They can become sad and they can experience climate anxiety. And it just doesn't work out to be so fearful. But if you give them these tools to see how their individual roles connect to a larger picture, then they feel more empowered. And all of this supports kind of the emotional engagement and creating connections between other people, between their community, and it fosters a sense of belonging. And so all of this, by just connecting to their everyday lives, we found to be really powerful ways that environmental educators were doing this. The final theme is collaborating with experts. And so there's all kind of expert partnerships we read about in these reviews. Environmental educators are doing a great job connecting to the local and global community through collaborations with scientists, resource managers, with universities, with community groups, with government agencies. The possibilities are endless. The benefits are just numerous, right? It gives you access to current research and real world data. It gives as an educator, it gives you confidence in working with an expert. Perhaps you don't know a topic, so you partner with somebody who does. It gives you their professional insights. And there's networking opportunities for you as an educator, for your participants, and for the collaborators themselves. One of the great things we read about are these mentorships that kind of sprung out from these collaborations. It introduced learners to new career paths, opened up new opportunities. The beautiful thing about these collaborations is that they're really reciprocal. They go both ways. You're getting something as an educator, the learners are getting more information, but the experts themselves are getting to talk to audiences they might not normally talk to and developing skills that they don't always get to put into practice. So as we've talked about with Heidi and Martha talking about some of the limitations, this came up in our review of the reviews as well. Certainly publication bias is something we ran into. And this is the idea that academic journals tend to privilege positive findings. And so we had to be aware that, yeah, almost all the studies we looked at say eeWORKS, and part of that could be publication bias. We also noted that a lot of the audiences of the study were often from weird populations, meaning the Western, the industrialized, rich, democratic countries, the exception being the climate change reviews. And so because of that, we're calling for certainly more diverse audiences. And other challenges we saw were related to measurement. Long-term follow-up is rare. It's really hard to measure behavior directly. We came across that in so many of the reviews and in so many of the studies. People are often relying on self-reports, as has been mentioned, or indirectly measuring behavior. Even more difficult to measure changes in environment. I know Nicole talked about this. That was one of our surprise findings, is how difficult it is. People say, we did this program to change the air quality, but it's so difficult to prove that. So of course, all of these challenges mean we need more funding and more time to do really solid measurement and evaluation, and certainly harder these days in these uncertain funding environments. And as all of us have said here, that these reviews are out of date the moment they began. Martha did a great job of explaining why that's true. So something I'm excited about, I'm a part of a community of practice that talks about systematic reviews, and a really trending topic is that AI may be able to help us a lot in terms of doing reviews more efficiently, more quickly, and at a reduced cost. And so that's something, if you're interested, let me know, and I'm happy to share some papers and more thoughts on how AI can be used for systematic reviews. So kind of the implications for practice that we saw, again, looking across all the reviews, was this focus on authentic learning experiences. And as educators, we know that gets at the heart of education, right? Particularly with young learners, authenticity is really important. And all these evidence-based strategies help support that authentic learning environment. And those include the opportunities for directed action. And one of the tools we saw that really helps is to build evaluation into program design from the very beginning. So I just talked about how hard it is to measure behavior, to measure environmental impact, and that can kind of be made easier if from the very outset you're thinking about how to do this. We really encourage people to support long-term engagement when possible. One-off programs can absolutely have impacts, but we saw across the reviews that those that were able to engage participants over a longer time frame or follow up with them through social media or online somehow, that they really were reported stronger findings. And as I said earlier, consider both individual and collective impacts. Don't rely just on changing individual behaviors, but look at how that connects to the bigger picture and how it connects to the community and the collective that's working together to address these issues. For research, we saw, of course, larger scale studies are needed, extended time frame, more diverse populations, better measurement of long-term impacts, and documentation of direct environmental outcomes, all of which I've talked about and all of our other panelists have talked about. These things are hard to do, but some things certainly are a worthy goal to work forward. And when I talked about the publication bias, the way to address that as a field, and this is common in many fields, not just environmental education, is to encourage the publication and welcoming of null and negative results. We have to know not only what works, but what doesn't work. So they could be really powerful tools. The key takeaway. So in summary, we learned there wasn't this, from our research, there was not some model of environmental education that emerged that said, this is how you have to do good EE. Instead, we got these suggested strategies backed by evidence, the using diverse approaches, the emphasizing participation, connecting to local, including action, making it personal, and partnering with experts. We were really impressed too with the field really does have methodological rigor and practical relevance. So through these, we could really see a diverse range of, as we were saying, qual and quantitative mixed methods evidence. And also, it was just such a delight to read these different studies to see what is going on in the field. And as Martha mentioned earlier, we were just looking at what researchers are covering. And so it was so exciting to imagine what else is going on in the field. So lots of work still to be done. We need to practice on sharing what we learn through events like these and through other reviews. And my final comment is the value of partnerships. So Judy did a great job of thanking all our funders who made this possible. Our university partners that brought different ways of working, different perspectives. And I cannot tell you enough how much we appreciate NAAEE. This would not have happened and would not continue to be happening without them. They connected us to you all, two practitioners, to kind of give us validity about our work. Does this check out with what's going on in the ground? I cannot tell you how much the staff support has meant to me. I was saying on the prep call for this that I've got other research I've been involved in, other publications, but these are my most cited publications. Part of it is people like to cite reviews, but also it's the amazing outreach done by NAAEE and all the material that Carrie's been sharing that's available on the website that has really kept this research going. It's such a treat as a researcher, not to just do the research and move on, but to continually revisit it. And NAAEE just really provided the momentum and inspiration. They nagged, followed up with us to say, hey, has the work been done? How's it going to work out for us? So I cannot thank NAAEE and all our partners, funders, and all of you for it. So thank you, Judy.
Allison, thank you so much. It's been great working with all of you. And Nicole and Allison, that was great. Heidi and Martha, that was great. And we're going to take the last few minutes here to answer a few other questions that have come in. One thing I just wanted to mention, when we started this project, we had a whole list of topics and we got to 8 of them out of like 30, just saying. And this is expensive work, it's labor intensive, and maybe AI will help us. But not only talking to teachers, we talked about residential learning. There were a lot of topics on that list. And so we would love to hear from you of what would be most helpful and ideas for where we can find funding. But I think one of the questions that keeps coming up here, and a lot of people have mentioned it, is what do we do as a field in thinking about the funding and being able to do long-term evaluation to look at the long-term impact, behavior change leading to actual action? And on the conservation one especially, we talked about the holy grail, that actually there's education and it leads to conservation on the ground. So do you all want to talk about your thinking about what we need to do as a field as we think about more long-term evaluation and thinking about how we show that what we're doing actually works over time, especially during a very difficult time in the US right now?
I'll jump in with a couple of thoughts on that. I mean, what I will say, Judy, you just packed in about 7 questions in one there. But two, maybe I'll jump back to a couple of the questions that were asked in the chat. I mean, one, maybe I'll just start at the end of your question and respond to something in the chat, which is that, a couple of people said, I love this work. It's really interesting and exciting. And I have a very small budget, right? Or I don't have expertise in my team to do this kind of work. And so maybe just start by saying, I too have been an educator working in the field, just getting my toes wet, many years ago, and saying it doesn't have to be challenging and complicated. I loved Martha's response on this, saying that there are a lot of validated instruments out there, even using these reviews that we've done, looking at these and seeing what have other people done. And that's something that's unlike plagiarism or feeling like you're a copycat, right? That's actually encouraged in the field of research. So please learn from others. And one of my favorite things to do, I mentioned this in the chat, is to use embedded assessments. So build research and evaluation tools into your programs, so that it actually becomes part of what you're doing. That's kind of one part of that response. Another thing I'd like to say, this is a question somebody asked, what was one of the most surprising things? And also in my background, this is where Judy and I first met. I worked in a conservation organization. We worked at WWF together. And so, there, like, that holy grail was to make a difference in terms of conservation on the ground. And one of the things that we found in our conservation review, that was one of the hardest ones to do. And it was partially because so few programs actually go all the way to documenting those conservation outcomes. Sometimes it's because it's time consuming and expensive. And then, interesting, on the positive side of that, sometimes because people were just assuming, if we engage people in communities in these really positive ways, of course it's going to make an impact on the ground. And so, that's where I think that really investing in these studies that are long term, that do actually go all the way to the end of making that conservation impact, is really important for our field. And I think that that's an opportunity that we have. We maybe don't need to do 100 of these, but as a field coming together and thinking about what are a couple of really high quality studies that we could do would be really important. And recognizing that, not just making this assumption that things will work, but actually having a few tested strategies that go all the way from beginning to end, so that we know, like, that we're doing is important. And maybe one last thing I'll add, since I've taken up too much airtime here, is somebody asked, what do we know about behavior change over the long term? I mean, so I'm in the environmental behavioral sciences department, where we do think about behavior and behavior change a lot. One of the things we did find throughout most of these reviews, though, and I think Heidi and Martha emphasized this nicely, is that many of the environmental education programs are doing a great job at working on the knowledge side of things and the attitude side of things, and not getting as much into even like the skills and the behavior. Now, I should clarify, it's not saying that they're not doing that in the programs, it's just that they're not documenting that. And so, just thinking again in program design and implementation, where do you want to be working along that chain? and where do you want to be documenting your impact? And so I think those were some things that we found throughout all of the reviews. Again, thinking about what is your program actually doing and how might you work with researchers to document that impact?
Thanks, Nicole. You answered all 500 questions. Excellent. Anybody else want to jump in on any of the questions you heard or anything Nicole said?
Yeah, I'll just add, this may be already covered. One thing NAAE could do is work with funders to help funders understand, hey, it's the long-term benefit and it's the overtime. It's one thing to develop the program and make sure it's working, but that happens in 2 years, and that's usually all the funding is for. So we need funding for 10 years after that. And I think you're already doing that. But the other thing is, as a researcher in a university, I'll often have students that want to explore something important, but they don't know where to find that program or how to have access to those participants. And here in this call, on this webinar, we're hearing from people who have 10 years worth of students who've been through a program and they need it evaluated. Maybe NAAE can help link these two together. The folks who have programs that they want evaluation and the folks who have students who can do the evaluation, and NAAE can broker these relationships, maybe.
I'll jump in on that really quickly. I'll say that years ago, one of the most fun things we did also with NAAEE and eeWORKS, and part of your EPA partnerships, was we had a really great design thinking workshop here where we tried to solve all these issues at once, right, Judy?
Yeah.
And one of the things that came out of it was doing some kind of matchup like this, right? Which I think is a brilliant idea. Maybe that could be our next stage in this. And just maybe one other piece I would add to this is that I know that many of you are doing excellent evaluation in your work, and maybe just to talk a little bit, I know NAAEE talks about this a lot, but kind of the slight differences between research and evaluation. So evaluation is so important in improving your own programs. And what research allows you to do is to kind of stretch beyond your own program and think about how do we help the field more broadly. And so just kind of thinking about, is there something you're doing where you could, maybe you're already doing evaluation, but is there a place where you could throw in a couple of research questions that look beyond the bounds of your program and that connect with others? And so again, I know this is something that NAAEE has been a champion of and working on for many decades.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Nicole. And we'll put a link in the chat on the learning module we did on research and evaluation and the difference and the similarities. Heidi and Allison, I want to give you a chance for some final words.
I was just going to say, I was just going to chime in on all of that, which is I've put in a bunch of links to the NAAEE evaluation websites, because there's outcome specific ones, resources, as well as just the overall eval website. And so there's a lot there. I just encourage people to take a look, because the more you can use maybe metrics or scales that other people have used already, then you can compare, and it becomes a little bit broader, as Nicole was saying, from your just focusing on your program. It's hard to develop questions for surveys and interviews and things like that from scratch, but it's so much easier to adapt ones that you find on the website. So those are just sort of some other suggestions I'd have. And also really grateful for being able to do this work, because it's so rich. Just re-seeing it all here today.
Yeah, it's amazing. Allison, and then Martha, I want to give you some closing words.
Yes, last thing I want to say, systematic reviews, it's so interesting. We have discussion in our lab all the time. What's the value? Are they valuable? There's other type of research reviews out there. People tend to love, they find systematic reviews very sexy. This is very powerful. So it's been nice to see how you all are using the systematic reviews, and just echo, what Judy was saying, that systematic reviews and research reviews are needed, but they're expensive, so they often get ignored. So appreciate the opportunity to talk about them with you all. So thank you.
And Martha, you get the last word, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Carrie.
Darn. I would just like to echo all these things, that the research body of research has important insights for all of us, for the people who have access to it and can dive in and use it. But we need to translate that research and make it more available to the practitioner community if we're ever going to use it. And that's one thing these reviews have done. because of NAAE's website and staff that translated each of the reviews into something that's a little bit more digestible. And so that's really the benefit of working with NAAEE on this stuff. So the conferences are one good thing that help exchange. I mean, they're a platform for exchanging research and information, but also the website in general has tons of great information in it. So thanks.
Thank you, Martha, and thank you, Allison, Heidi, Nicole. We can't thank you enough. We're so lucky to work with all of you and so many other great researchers across the country and environmental educators, and we keep learning. And if anybody has ideas for funding, we will pass the hat after this to all of you because we need more funding for this work. What a great team. Thank you so much for being here. And Carrie, I'm going to turn it over to you to just have a few announcements. Thank you all so much.
Thanks everyone for everything you contributed today. The recording will be coming to your inbox where you registered for this webinar. So you'll get that, you'll get the slides, and you'll get the comments in our chat. So you'll have all the links that we've shared, and hopefully we'll start to dig into the amazing work of eeWORKS. We've also got some things coming up for our early childhood education specialists. We do have our conference coming up here in July. It is online, and the theme is rooted and resilient. So we encourage you to check out the website listed here and register for content that you can access all year long. Speaking of conferences, our NAAEE Annual Conference and Research Symposium is coming up soon, and registration will be opening even sooner. So the website is listed, conference.naaee.org. It will be fully virtual this year, which means regardless of where you are in the moment, you can join this incredible group of educators, researchers, and practitioners who are helping forward together the environmental education field. Speaking of funding, NAAEE is in the middle of this fantastic virtual 5K fundraiser. We encourage you to participate. You can either do your own 5K, whether it's running, swimming, or rolling your way into that sort of 3.2 mile distance. But we're really working to increase the funds around the environmental education work being done at NAAEE. We would love your support. We would love your donations. We would love you helping share the word, because we're doing this together, and it is more important than ever that we're able to continue forward in it. And we'd love to hear from you, whether it's a topic on the EE webinars of the future or what you learned today or questions that you still have. Please scan the QR code here. Let us know what you'd like to learn about through our EE webinars. We are more than eager to continue offering these fantastic conversations with experts in all different areas. And again, thank you for being part of this incredible webinar. Thank you to all of our panelists. Phenomenal job. Judy, thank you as always for bringing so much energy and humor and light to the work that we're doing. And as we said, it is your contributions to this field, everyone who's in this call, your questions, your ideas that move us forward. So thanks so much to everyone.